What's something you can't believe you had to explain to another adult? Story 1, press up when you want to go up an elevator and down if you want to go down. She thought you had to guess where the elevator was. And if it was under you, let's say, you had to press up. Story 2, my wife, and I had to explain to the neighbor that our dog is part of our family. And no, they can't just have him. Their kids wanted our dog, which was cute, until the mother also decided that she wanted our dog. And it was only fair that they got to have him on the weekends, because we get to have him all week long. Story 3, that no matter how much you might want to put a camo pattern on your walls, you not the paint have to determine what that pattern looks like. And you will also have to purchase multiple cans of paint tinted differently, because camo doesn't come out of can that way. Story 4, had to explain to a neighbor that the sun and the moon were not the same thing. Edit went to bed, and this comment blew up. Thank you, kind stranger, for my first Reddit silver. I have other stories about this neighbor that would blow minds even further, stories for another time. Story 5, I had to explain to my mother that muscles are meat. A piece of meat was tough. And so I must have said something about what part of the cow the muscle came from. No, we weren't eating muscles. We were eating meat. She was sickened by the concept that anyone would eat muscles. Somehow this got to the point of her claiming that humans didn't have any meat on them because they aren't food. I did not win that argument. Humans have no meat. Meat is not muscles, period. Oh, it turns out people are not part of the animal kingdom either. It was a dismal childhood. Story 6, my mom asked me why you couldn't see the borders of states when you were in an airplane. Edit, my mother is a wonderful, unbelievably caring person. She just got a 1950s Catholic education. Story 7, I had to explain to a teacher in front of her class that a penguin was I didn't want to be like that, but she was adamant that if it didn't fly, it wasn't a... Story 8, my dad had like 6 or 7 paid recurring charges for internet and a lot of malware on his computer. I had to explain free to my 67-year-old dad, so that was something. Story 9, that I couldn't just go to the bathroom and pee my period out to be done with it. He was about 19, 20 at the time, and obviously didn't have education, been married 25 years. He will never live that down. Story 10, I was explaining to my ex-girlfriend's brother that I will be traveling to Hawaii. He asked, can you drive? Or do you have to take a plane to get there? He's 35. Story 11, also, that earning above a tax threshold doesn't mean you're retroactively taxed at that new band for all of your earnings. Worked with someone who turned down a pay rise. Because of this, edit, based on the replies I've been receiving, am glad I've been able to help some people better understand their taxes. Story 12, my mother told me nobody can live on $40,000 a year, and I was unable to get her to understand that it is pretty normal to make $40,000 or less, and people do fine with that salary. Story 13, when a smart bomb strikes a building and blows it up, it doesn't just kill the bad guys, it kills everyone in the building. Smart only means it's going to hit the building instead of a random location. Story 14, she's an educator. It was one of those days where Mars was super bright. She was super sure the moon was Mars, and suddenly it was super visible and close to Earth, like it came super close and back off overnight. Story 15, I work with this guy who thinks that average precipitation us, like some sort of quota that nature is obliged to meet. For example, if it's a particularly dry summer, he thinks it will just rain a lot in the last few days before summer ends. Story 16, don't bring your dog to work and let her pee on the carpet. Tiny and little puddles are not okay. Just because they're tiny, she weighs 4 pounds. He said she's so little it doesn't matter. He said he never even notices at home, and if I had a dog, I'd feel differently. Have a dog. Still don't want urine and feces on my carpets at home or at work. Story 17, scenario 1 them. So where are you from? Me, South Africa. Then wait, what? Aren't you supposed to be black? Me, you know scenario 2 them. So which country are you from? Me, South Africa. Them, yeah. But which country? Me, yeah, I just said South Africa. Them, come on, dude, just tell me the country. I know where South of Africa is. Me, no. Actually, South Africa is a whole country. Story 18, if you don't go to work, you won't get paid. Especially when you're constantly complaining about always being broke, you can't call out whenever you don't want to go in, and then wonder why you have no money. Story 19, alcohol has calories. I had to be the one to tell my friend when she was in her mid-20s that the vodka she loved has calories. She was so shocked and said, what? I thought since it was clear like water, it didn't have any calories. Story 20, that drinks have caloric content. A coworker was complaining how she was having trouble losing weight and didn't realize drinking 4 hot chocolate a day was not really conducive to weight loss. Story 21, had to explain to someone in college that 3 seconds of dish soap was not necessary for each plate you wash, as in he would turn the dish soap upside down and squeeze for 1, 2, 3 for each plate. Story 22, I worked in elementary school where a fellow teacher was doing a lesson on dinosaurs and taught his grade 2s to say pterodactyl instead of pterodactyl. I had to correct him immediately. Story 23, that Spain is a real place. that not everyone who speaks Spanish is a Mexican, and that Mexicans are called that because they're from Mexico, that titties and boobies are not the anatomical words for breasts. Story 24, that Sikhs aren't Muslim. This is to someone who reads very widely and is usually pretty on the ball about things, and will look things up if they don't know understand, except on this point, which they still won't acknowledge that they're wrong. Story 25, that dropping water bombs on the Notre Dame fire is stupid. He just wasn't hearing it, because of course I couldn't know more about firefighting than the president. I'm a firefighter, I was in uniform. Story 26, I was flying back home from overseas with a friend, and I said something about how it was a bummer we couldn't bring fresh produce back. She asked why we couldn't, and I explained you weren't allowed to bring plants when flying crossing borders. She thought it was absurd that I would consider a piece of produce, e.g., an avocado or mango, to be a plant. It became a pretty heated argument. Story 27, a dear friend of mine phoned his mother on his first week away at college to ask her how you cooked eggs. He was having trouble working shells in. He wasn't kidding. Story 28 told my roommate that if he cooked food on less than the highest level of heat, he wouldn't burn as much food and would generally have more success. A week later, I explained to him that when he was just boiling water, high heat was okay. Story 29 had a coworker who said she didn't eat eggs because they're forced abortion babies. Chick refused to accept that unfertilized eggs don't hatch, and she didn't have to worry because she's just eating the chicken's periods. After this conversation carried on far too long, she proceeded to eat a bowl of pasta that I'm 97 sure was made with eggs. Story 30, if you don't pay your utility bill, then said utility will be turned off. Every day at work, I have to say this to customers. Every day, I work for an ISP, but where I am hydro cannot be disconnected in the winter, which only became a rule after an elderly couple froze to death. Story 31, that you can't get AIDS through intercourse if you don't already have the HIV virus inside your body or your partner is carrying it. A guy I talked to once thought that gay men got AIDS simply by having gay, and that the disease just spontaneously appeared through the act of insemination. I don't even think that he understood the concept of a virus. Story 32, food isn't vegetarian just because it has vegetables in it, and lack of vegetables doesn't automatically mean it isn't vegetarian. Story time, I went to a restaurant and was looking over the menu, which had vegetarian-friendly options marked. Pretzels with cheese weren't marked, so I asked the waitress if she knew why. If it was just something to cheese, I still wanted to split the pretzels with others at the table and skip the cheese dip. Her answer, well, it's like, so pretzels don't have any vegetables like broccoli in them. They're just bread, so they aren't vegetarian. But if you wanted something that is, then you could maybe get the chicken and broccoli because it does have a vegetable with it. But like the mac and cheese wouldn't be, because it doesn't have vegetables. Mac and cheese was marked vegetarian friendly. Story 33, that all babies, including the first one after marriage, take 9 to 10 months to develop. Just because the first one comes along in under 9 months doesn't mean that it takes less gestational time. I was in my mid-20s and she was several years older. Story 34, I had to explain to a lady that dinosaur bones at the Museum of Natural History in D.C. were real. She thought dinosaurs were mythical creatures, not real. Story 35, a co-worker of mine recently quit without notice. A few weeks later, she wasn't liking her new job much and said she wanted to come back to the store. She could not comprehend the concept of being ineligible for rehire. If you quit without notice, they're not going to take you back. Story 36, no, you can't put that metal pan in the microwave. He was also driving a golf cart with my other friend, and when he was close to hitting something, he hopped out and tried pushing it away. Other friend hit the brake. Story 37, that Michigan wasn't the capital of Detroit, and that Jerusalem, not Jerusalem, exists. My former best friend was and still is the dumbest person I've ever met. Story 38, when I was in grade school, my teacher asked the class which option is better for the environment, having a hot shower or a cold shower. I raised my hand and said cold. She corrected me and said no, hot, because hot water kills germs. I had to correct her, and I said, well, soap kills germs too, and it takes a lot of energy to make water hot, which pollutes the environment. She was still baffled. Story 39, I'm a vet. Someone brought in a kitten they had rescued off the street a few days prior because it had fleas. During the exam, the kitten was very abnormally anxious and constantly crying, fighting me, and nipping. The owner said she had been doing at home as well. I asked what they had been feeding her. Oh, we weren't sure what to feed her, so we didn't. What? 3 grown, non-disabled, independent adults collectively decided the solution to their situation was to not feed a sick young animal for 3 days, lock her in a closet when she started crying, and offer her a small plastic bottle cap of water a day. I fed her immediately, and she ate like she was possessed. And the scary thing, they absolutely meant well. They were genuinely remorseful when I explained that, animals need food just like you do, Jesus Christ. These people vote and drive and procreate boundaries. As in, if I tell you that mom doesn't feel well and needs to sleep, don't be calling or knocking and waking her up, telling me you just wanted to know how she was doing. I don't care about what you want. Or when mom just wants to be left alone, but you go out of your way to bother her anyway. Or that gas canisters, those orangered ones people fill up, need to be completely sealed. You can't have them open and exposed in the back of your truck, filling the back of the truck with fumes. Don't be giving me that it needs to breathe bullshit, or that pasta doesn't need to cook for 30 minutes, and that's not how every restaurant does it. Or that you don't put a tray of chicken on an oven rack that's at the topmost position inside the oven. Then put the oven on broil and expect you to cook. Or that you don't need to delete every number from your call log as soon as you hang up because you think not deleting them means they won't be able to call you anymore. That you don't need to put your fridge at the highest setting and making everything inside freeze just because you think that if you don't, the water bottles you stack inside won't be cold enough. That you know everything, my neighbors. Story 40, explaining to a high school geography teacher in Canada that the big river in London is pronounced Thames, not Thames. Explaining to a high school geography teacher in England that not every Canadian has seen the prairies. Story 41, that the North Pole is an actual place on the planet, and not just a mythical place where Santa and his elves live. Also had to explain that the South Pole is real. Granted that they did not think Santa is real, but they also didn't believe me flat out about the poles. They first argued saying I was crazy, and then Googled it. Story 42, I am a manufacturing engineer, and had to explain to a 33-year-old engineering technician what a nut, bolt, and washer were Friday. This is just the icing on her grossly incompetent cake, and I've been logging these incidents with the intent of firing her Monday morning. Edit, she made it easy for me, and no call, no show today. Story 43, how the basics of English conversation work in regards to its self-referencing shorthand words used to minimize on unneeded repetition. I.e. so what'd you do this weekend? I saw a movie, me, did you like it? Did I like what me? Did I like what me? The solar eclipse that happened last month. I had to explain to my then 27-year-old table manners. Pigs have better table manners than his family. They would eat like toddlers' mouths opened, food dripping everywhere, mixing everything in their plate like they wanted to mash it. The table was dirty with their shitting everywhere. I was kind of shocked the first time I ate there. His family had more money than mine, so I thought it would be a nice experience. But each time I think about it, we are separated now for another reason. Story 44, this is already like 5K comments deep. But I have a couple. To preface, I'm a graphic designer. I also work in the fashion industry and do a whole lot of like packaging, signs, and clothing print, for example, floral prints on a shirt, etc. At my first job, I had to create an ad for athletic wear for a boxer company. My boss sent me a Shutterstock photo of a guy running, but his back was facing toward the camera as he was running away. My boss told me that he wanted this exact photo with this guy, but he wanted the guy to be facing the viewer and running toward them. I'm good at Photoshop, but not turn entire guy around so that his features and otherwise unknown details magically appear good. I had to explain that what he was asking for was completely impossible. Several years ago, a graphic designer made a series of images making fun of actual client requests. One image he made was of just the backside of an elephant with the client quote under it reading, "Could you just turn the elephant around, dude? It's facing the front in Photoshop." I remember being blown away by how ridiculous that request was, and I couldn't believe, later, that the same happened to me. Second story. At that same job, I did a lot of license for companies, and at that time I was doing a lot of work for a company that rhymes with BC Fomics. This specific line was a schmarly FWIN sleepwear line that utilized a bunch of diamond patterns on clothing. One pattern was an alternating black and red diamond pattern, exactly like this. The buyer for a company that rhymes with Thought Mopic was like, I don't really like that. Can we see it with the colors reversed, where the red make that black, and where the black is, make it red? Now, if you have eyeballs and some sense, you'd immediately realize that swapping the colors just makes the same exact pattern. Same exact. So I emailed her back and explained to her that it would just be the same since the pattern is just made up of two alternating colors. She emailed me back with "just do it." So I did and sent it to her, and she replied, "It just looks the same. FFS." Then my boss walks in and asks why I sent the same image to her rather than just updating it with her request. I had to demonstrate to a grown man why switching the colors made the same pattern. I had to open it up and physically do it in front of him for him to understand. I have so many other stories from that disaster of a place, but those two are my favorite. Story 45, the concept of interest on a loan. She was born stupid with a silver spoon in her mouth, and her parents lost everything when she was in her 20s. Here we're talking about trying to get a loan for a car, totally confused because the cost of the car didn't equal the total monthly payments. Story 46, that getting a bunch of morning after pills from the student health center and having me take one every time we had unprotected was a recipe for disaster. And before you ask, he grew up in the Bay Area and was the child of two professors, so it's not because of a lack of access to ed. Story 47, I have to explain nearly every triage shift that patients in the emergency department are seen in the order of how sick they are, not their order of arrival. Usually the people who don't understand are young adults, but not always. At this point, it's just a reflex. EO, and an unbelievable number of people need to be told that no, they can't have a bed when there are 80 people in the department for 20 beds. It just boggles the mind. Story 48, every St. Patrick's Day in San Antonio, they dye the river green. I work hospitality, and I had a middle-aged woman asking me if she could drink the water from the river. I laughed thinking it was a joke, but she was really serious about it and got mad saying I was being condescending. I told her no, you should not drink that water, and she said that since there was green beer, she thought the river could be beer. I reminded her there are ducks living there, and I don't think the city wanted drunk ducks going around downtown. She called corporate saying I insulted her. She was not drunk. Story 49, how when 8 to 9 people get into a small, rented hot tub, that their body temperature will bring down the temperature of the water. But your body is hot, they said, but it's not as hot as the water, and when two things of different temperatures touch, they want to equalize. But wouldn't your body just warm up the water? What I couldn't believe was even after I explained it, they still didn't get it. Story 50, to a grown woman of a 13-ish-year-old girl, no, your daughter is not bleeding from her, but she doesn't need a hospital. It's her period and is normal, on 2 separate occasions to 2 different grown women. Story 51, that there are 5 Great Lakes in North America that straddle the border with Canada, and that the largest city in Canada is Toronto. He had never heard of either of them. Story 52, co-worker wished me Happy Star Wars Day on April 4th. Tried to explain to her that Star Wars Day is May 4th. As in, may the 4th be with you. She did not back down and insisted she was correct because she had seen on the internet. Story 53, how long is a light year? This was asked in Norwegian. So he was asking how long is in time. In context, I thought he was joking, so I made a slight chuckle, then I looked at his face and saw he was dead serious. Story 54, last weekend, I had to explain that a parking brake existed and what it was for to a friend. Please bear in mind, we're both 34. She's from the prairies. We were parking a car on a steep hill, and I was like, it's fine, just throw on the parking brake. Blank stare, I then reached over and applied the brake. Wide-eyed look, I understand, not needing a parking brake. But wouldn't you wonder about that big lever in the center of your car? She had been driving for 18 years. Story 55, I-17F, had to defend myself against a coworker 21M that no, my birth control was not Molly. I had it in the package with the RX label and everything. Then he proceeds to ask me, why are you taking that? Do you think you're going to get pregnant at work? At this point, I couldn't even explain myself because I was so blown away, and instead I just had to tell him to go back to health class. Good riddance. And no wonder why he comes into work and complains about his crazy girlfriend having pregnancy scares. Story 56, not an adult, but when I was in 3rd grade, a 5th grader came up to me and asked if I was from London. I explained Jay was from England, but not London specifically. She thought England was a city in London and thought I was lying when Kay told her it wasn't. Story 57, I'm dating myself. I'm old as dirt, but I had to explain that the abbreviation AD after a year does not stand for after death, that it stands for Anno Domini. Fine, it's trivia. Not everyone cares about those things, but I had to explain this to a 5th grade history instructor, my 5th grade history instructor. She wouldn't even consider the fact that before Christ and after death left 33 or so years unaccounted for. Story 58, yeah, that big yellow sign with the word closed in big red letters. The one that you picked up and moved out of the way so you could come in the door. It means this room isn't open to public access. Get out. Story 59, there are 100 cents in a dollar. I had to explain this to a college math student. I was her tutor, edit for context back in the day. I was a math tutor at a community college in their developmental education department. These are classes designed for college students who don't have the requisite knowledge to do college-level math. At the time, we had these special modular courses for students who didn't even have those skills. I'm talking elementary school level stuff. Well, this girl was one of those students in this class. One of the activities was to convert cents to dollars. So I asked, okay, how many cents are there in a dollar? Her response was, I don't know. 50. It was at this point that I realized this girl could easily be taken advantage of if others knew of this. I hope she pays for things by credit card and not with cash. Story 60. I know someone who I would normally describe as being way smarter than me. This one time, however, we were discussing the meat industry when he made a comment about meat animals not being supposed to exercise too much because it builds too much muscle and doesn't leave room for meat. I asked what he meant. Yeah, turns out no one ever explained to him that meat is the muscle of the animal. had spent his whole life believing it was some other kind of tissue separate from both fat and muscle. Story 61 in the service of Buddy asked what a serial killer was. I explained a serial killer was a slang term for someone who murdered a person and the victim's body was found in a bathtub. It originated because one time a victim was found in the bathtub filled with milk and a banana up his, he says, really? And I'm like, no. It is someone who kills many people over time, often using the same method. He was a great guy, just a little naive. Story 62 had to explain to a friend that no, she didn't have multiple personality disorder, just cause she couldn't decide what to wear every day and always change her mind on things. Story 63 that you do not call your ISP when you could not reach 911 using your mobile phone due to not having any signal. He thought Wi-Fi was needed in order to make emergency phone calls. This happened recently. Story 64, you're telling me you don't understand why it's a bad idea to reach into the broken bandsaw while it's still powered and moving to try and stop it by putting your fingers in a wheel. He wanted to argue this and thought he had ground to mock me for telling him it was dangerous. As Story 65, when I worked at a bakery, one of the dudes I trained turned out to not know how to use a twist tie. Found that out while prepping rolls for the Thanksgiving rush. I bagged 1,000 rolls and had to rebag most of his. Story 66, that blue and yellow make green. And once their sheer astonishment had subsided a bit, the secrets behind orange and purple, I could not believe it. Story 67, when I worked in retail in a county where there was a 5-cent plastic bag tax, I had to explain to multiple customers that lived in a different county that they still had to pay the tax at our store, even if they don't have that tax in their county. Story 68 explained, described, and drew pictures of the clitoris to 5 grown women. None of them believed me that there was anything there until I started asking about oral and how it feels really good when their guy licks that spot. I was 25-ish and the rest of the ladies were all at least 10 years older than me. Story 69 had to explain to someone that helicopters still exist. He thought they were like a failed invention or something that just always blew up, and I guess he was thinking they were discontinued. He also watches way too many movies apparently. It was hilarious. Story 70, not me, but my dad at the time, he was almost 50, and his GF is a year younger than him. I had just called to talk to him about this book called The Boy in the Striped Pajamas. It's a book about the Holocaust. After the phone call, my dad apparently explained the story to his GF. She asked, is it based off a true story? He responded that while the events around it were obviously real, the boy himself wasn't. She freaked out and said, wait, there's a man out there killing Jews. We need to stop him. Why hasn't anyone done anything? She apparently didn't pay attention to years of history class or listen to her elders. Dad had to teach her about WW2 and how Hitler is no longer a direct threat to the Jews. Story 71, how to make an Italian sandwichogy at home. She had purchased them pre-made at stores, but didn't realize you can make them at home until she watched me put one together on our lunch break at work. I had to explain that you buy and slice tomatoes, peppers, pickles, etc. Then you put it all in a roll that you also bought. She honestly had no idea you could do that. For clarification, I'm from the Northeast USA. I'm talking about a cold sandwich made on a long roll that is stuffed with veggies and oftentimes sliced meat and cheese. Story 72, having to explain to a partner, out loud in a nearly full cinema, that this film about refugee aliens wasn't actually a documentary. I could feel the stares. Story 73, a guy at work, says something about masturbating. Then he goes on to explain how he's not ashamed. Everyone does it, and on and on. I had to explain that we're not in elementary school anymore. We all know that everyone does it, and nobody he was talking to was ashamed, that he wasn't providing us with some big revelation. Story 74 had a lady with asthma tell me it had nothing to do with her lungs. It's just stuff gets in the way of her breathing. Her lungs are just fine. Explained to her how asthma works, and she couldn't wrap her head around it. Story 75, that you can't try on earrings. I sell jewelry at markets. A friend who made my signs also made a small one saying that health regulations mean you can't try on earrings unless they're clip-on ID. Always laughed at it. Because who's that dumb? Then I met the person who was that dumb. I was talking to her friend, and when I turned around, I saw her with the earring dangling from her ear. Thankfully, she decided to buy that pair, because at that point I couldn't resell it, and should have been buying it anyway. Story 76, that islands do not float. They want tip over if you build too much on one side of them. And no, the big ones are anchored down, so that they're in the same place for the map. To be right is not a correct statement. And yes, this was all the aftermath of me showing someone a video of that American general, and him saying, but he's right, isn't he? Story 77, the difference between subjective and objective, and that opinions don't become even a little bit valid just because there's gaslighting is a to recognize. Story 78, there is this guy I know who is probably the smartest person I've ever met. He has 2 doctorates, several master's degrees, and has published more works in his fields of interest than Stephen King has works of fiction. But I had to explain to him where his food came from. He was unaware that the creature called a chicken was the same as the food called chicken. He didn't know that the various cuts of beef came from cows, that ham and bacon came from pigs. He was a city dweller his entire life, and the only animals he had ever seen were cats, dogs, pigeons, and squirrels. Cows, pigs, chicken, and other farm animals were only ever pictures in children's books, and he stopped reading children's books at a very young age. There's a scene in one of Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes stories where Dr. Watson is surprised to learn that Sherlock Holmes is unaware of the heliocentric theory of the solar system. To Holmes, knowing that the Earth orbits the Sun rather than the Sun orbiting the Earth doesn't matter. Because both would look the same from his perspective, he only has time to learn the things that matter right here. My friend was the same. His areas of interest were well outside the sources of meat on his plate. He didn't need to know that both hamburger and steak both came from a cow, so he never bothered to learn it. But he was curious enough that he paid attention when I explained all this stuff to him. Story 79, frequently repeated lies are still lies. Repetition is not truth. I live in redneck country. Religion, guns, Republican voters, meth, and idiots, usually in the same person all at once. Story 80, that the credit card only works when the magnetic strip side is swiped. She would always turn it every which way until it worked. I thought it was odd, but I never said anything until she brought it up one day by saying something like, I never know which way it's going to work. I had to explain that it only works when the magnetic stripe is swiped because that's what the machine is reading. She said it doesn't always work when she swipes that side. I was like, okay, whatever you say. Story 81, no, sir. You don't have to call the cops over 2. Sir, my manager is coming. They need to get the keys for the register. You do not need to call the cops for 2. What could they possibly do? You bought what you wanted, and we provided you with what you bought. Well, not really, but he was threatening to call the cops over 2. I realistically could have just closed the window and left because we're a privately owned restaurant, and I am allowed to refuse service to anyone if they're being uncooperative. Story 82 example from a few hours ago. I was coaching a boys' high school soccer game. The other team were repeatedly poor sports, using foul language, overtly physical play, etc. I was tending to one of my kids who was hurt by a now ejected player, and as I told the other coach things need to simmer down, let's have a gentleman's game, he stared blankly at me. Half their team didn't shake hands after the game either, and they won the game. Story 83, I moved to Juneau, Alaska, and was talking on the phone with my sister. Said I could see the Mendenhall Glacier from my apartment. Sister, no you can't, all the glaciers melted. We were in our late 20s at the time. Story 84, that someone will have to meet us with the vehicles at the takeout point at the end of our trip, because the river, in fact, does not run in a circle. Story 85, never use kitchen towels to clean your toilet if your food has mold on it. Throw it out if the trash is full. Take it out, lock the front door whenever you leave the house, or get back home if you didn't buy, or make the food you see in the fridge. Don't just eat it. At least ask First Source 23 years old who lived with extremely incoherent and babied roommates last year. Story 86, maybe I'm going about this wrong, but it's disturbing the number of people I have to explain the difference between the solar system, galaxies, and the universe. Story 87, that I cannot care what I look like and still be a heterosexual woman. I was an 18-year-old, and my grandma swore up and down that since I didn't like makeup or nice clothes that I was gay. She was 100 serious.